Bloody Moon, a film you won't soon forget.
When you know how to celebrate, every day is Mother's Day.
Final exam. He's come back.
On the one night they were celebrating New Year's Eve, he was out, ending their life.
Is imagination simply contained in the mind, or does it tap into an unseen world with messages waiting to be told? There is a place where legends cross over into our world, where strange visions and whispers beckon, and superstition takes hold. Step into the Black Cat's shadow.
Hey guys, and welcome back to the Black Cat Shadow. This is episode 10. This episode we are talking about slasher movies. And I'm your host, Andy, podcasting from Kansas City, Missouri. And I'm being joined tonight by my co-host, Dakota. How's it going tonight, Dakota?
Oh, it's going. I'm just trying to make it through the day. I'm ready to kind of dive into this new subgenre, something that I'm not too familiar with, so maybe I can learn something.
All right, cool, yeah. So before we go any further, we're going to get into our 5-minute frenzy.
5-minute frenzy.
Okay, so for this episode's 5-minute frenzy, Dakota had told me to watch a movie called Silent House from 2011. And it stars Elizabeth Olsen, who is one of the Olsen sisters, but not one of the twins. And I guess, in this segment, we're just kind of going to go through like what we think happened in the movie, try to from each one of our viewpoints and see how they differ. So yeah, I think Elizabeth Olsen is probably the only notable character in that movie. There's only like a few characters in that story to begin with. And I thought this movie was very similar to Session 9 to an extent, because you really didn't know like what the source of horror was going to be. You thought, well, maybe it could be some squatters, because they, at the beginning she talks about how there's how they had squatters that vandalized the house. And you think, well, so it could be squatters, or it could be like ghosts or something like that. So I thought it did a really good job of building up the mystery of what was going to happen. And also, with the missing memories, I think, from the very beginning, you can tell that, Elizabeth Olsen's character still had some repressed memories that she couldn't remember some things. And so, we go through and she starts hearing things and seeing other people in the house. So what the plot of the movie is or the synopsis is, this girl and her father and uncle are fixing up their summer house, and I think they're getting ready to sell it, if I'm not mistaken. But they're trying to do some renovations on it so they can sell it. It starts off in the evening, and they're kind of doing some things around the house, and but she starts hearing noises in the house, like somebody is in the house with them, because her dad was downstairs in the basement and she heard noises upstairs. And early on in the movie, you find out that they had trouble with squatters. And so she thinks that, well, maybe there's somebody still in the house. So she gets her dad to go look, and she's doing some things around the house. And, her dad gets knocked out by somebody, and she sees like a person in the house. And so the movie goes through where she's just hiding and trying to get out of the house and things like that. As the movie goes along, it seems like, you find out that she has these repressed memories of child abuse. So I guess it turns out that her father, I guess molested her when she was younger, and her uncle was there too, and so she like blocked it out of her memory, and she has like she sees these other people, and they're like other like facets of her personality, so they basically like get her to remember what happened. And so, you find out that she's the one that's like attacking her dad, and these other people that she's seen is actually just in her mind, and so you find out all that, and then she ends up killing her dad, but then she just like leaves her uncle there and just like walks off, and that's the end of the movie. So, I guess, for my take on it, I think it's, very similar to Session 9. Like I said, it was dealing with repressed memories and kind of like hallucinations, but you can see it from the person's point of view that's going crazy, rather than seeing, where in Session 9 you were seeing it from the outside, seeing like what was happening. What are your thoughts on it, Dakota?
Well, you were pretty much spot on with the idea of repressed memories. I mean, the entire story is drawn from personal experiences. Like we talked about in our breakdown of psychological horror, you have these different aspects that tend to draw out, that can kind of tend to draw out of your character from these movies. One of the big things in this movie was her I think she kind of started to learn it eventually, catch on. I think it's just she didn't give into it. She didn't want to give into it. In psychology, you have what you call a lapse moment, where you lapse into these repressed memories and eventually let it out, which she did. She let it out in one continuous rant, and pretty much destroyed her family at that point. Killed her father and her uncle. Well, we don't really know if she completely killed her father and uncle. We just know that she walked away. But it's very interesting, especially because it does pull on every aspect of psychological horror that we broke down. That's kind of why I wanted you to watch it, because it's a great example of what psychological horror can be. Just in leaving the ending open really helped. Something about this movie is that it's actually a remake of a 2010 movie from Uruguay, actually. The movie in Uruguay is called La Casa Muda, which basically means the silent house. But it's actually supposedly based off a real life event from 1940. Oh,
okay. Wow. I didn't know that.
And this is actually one of the first horror movies of its type to actually use the continuous shot. You know how certain movies, how they have the one continuous shot, like it's kind of like the camera's like rotating around and it's panning around the entire room.
Yeah.
Kind of like Alfred Hitchcock did in The Rope from 1948.
Yeah, I think I remember something about that. But yeah, so in that Alfred Hitchcock movie, they did something similar, like one take shot. Because I've never seen Rope, so I wasn't sure. So they did the same thing as in Silent House?
Yeah, it's one continuous shot, so it means like they start off in one room and they follow the actor to another room. It was actually shot in a regular house, from what I'm understanding. And it's actually the house they supposedly filmed in was actually built in Victorian times, just like they wanted. So they actually used the house that they found. Not seeing anything else on it, but this movie it's one of the greater horror movies of this new decade that we're in.
Yeah, I thought it was pretty good. I mean, I had seen it before, so I knew where it was going, but I'm trying to think. I think the first time I didn't really catch on that it was, I thought there was actually somebody in the house or like a ghost or something like that. So I thought it really did a good job. I like the setting, the house was really creepy and some of the effects were pretty good. They might have used some CGI here and there, but I couldn't really tell. But overall, yeah, I like the movie. It's definitely something that, I mean, I guess, on a rewatch, you since you kind of know what's happening, it loses a little bit of rewatchability, but it's still a good movie. To watch like every few years or something like that.
Well, see, something in this movie that I kind of caught on to. You know how they were the camera that they had to use to light the room because the generators went out.
Oh yeah, the Polaroid camera.
Yeah, that's actually foreshadowing.
Oh, you're right.
Correct. There's a lot of foreshadowing in that, and I didn't catch on to it until like the third time watching through it. I was like, wow, that's like, but it was really late in the movie to see that kind of foreshadowing, don't you think?
Yeah, well, and she used it, but then also, like, if you remember, her dad actually used it at the very beginning to take a picture of like the mold that they found on the wall. And
oh, okay.
That was something like when I saw him using it at the beginning, I was like, oh yeah, that kind of like brought it all back for me. I remember like kind of what they did, at the end. So yeah, but yeah, you're right. I mean, that's a great use of foreshadowing. But yeah, when you rewatch a movie like this, you kind of pick up more on the foreshadowing and those clues that they put out there, which that makes it worth rewatching by itself.
Yeah, and here's something really great about this movie. We were talking about in psychological horror. We were talking about the idea between the section, like the repressed memories. Well, these repressed memories, she put them out of her head and thought it happened to somebody else. So obviously, she was thinking that this girl, what was her name that she started calling her?
Oh yeah, the other girl was named Sophie, I think.
Yeah, Sophia.
Yeah, Sophia. Yeah, there you go.
So this other girl, Sophia, basically she's putting her own memories onto somebody else and creating another persona. It's just basically taking dissociative identity to an extreme, basically creating hallucinations.
Yeah.
Yeah, in psychology, we see this all the time. People taking these memories and putting them onto somebody else. The movie was actually directed by Chris Kintis and Laura Lau. They were the ones who directed Open Water.
Okay, I've never seen that one.
It's another psychological horror, and I think that should be your next one.
All right.
It was 2003, and it's pretty much it's one of those movies. It's very, very similar to this, just because it's not as like promoted, not as out there like other horror movies are.
Yeah, I mean, I heard about it. I've heard other people talking about Open Water. I just never really sought it out because it wasn't something that I would typically watch. But hey, that's the point of our 5-minute frenzy segment, to kind of get me out of my normal comfort zone and to get to watch some psychological horror. Okay, guys. So in this series of episodes, in our Horror 101 series, we wanted to kind of break down a different subgenre in each episode. And so, like we said at the beginning of the episode, this one's about slasher movies. And so I wanted to kind of start off with, a simple definition of a slasher movie, what I consider to be a slasher movie. And I think that an easy way to think of it is you take the movie Halloween, and people call it the Halloween formula. You've got a masked or unseen or disfigured killer, or sometimes more than one person, and they're stalking a set of victims. They're usually armed with a blade or weapon of some kind, and they usually lurk and stalk their prey, their victims. And there's usually a lot of POV shots, like point of view shots. And there's like a final girl usually at the end that usually has to end up facing the killer at the end. But this is kind of the template that movies like Halloween and Friday the 13th really brought together. Of course, everybody has their different definition. There's, an even simpler definition would be just a serial killer who is spreading fear in a community by killing innocent people. And then at the end, the killer's defeated and the main character survives. So that's basically a real simple definition. But for me, I don't know if it's so much any movie that has a serial killer in it. I think it has to be like I don't know, like more of an icon. I mean, there's a lot of slasher movies that don't really have iconic killers, but I don't know, because I feel like there's a lot of crime movies that have serial killers in them, and I wouldn't really consider crime type movies to be slashers. But some more common tropes of a slasher movie, some other things that might tell you you're watching a slasher movie: if the killer's wearing a mask, if they have a certain signature weapon, but no guns or technologically advanced weapons, only things like knives and axes and hammers or other bladed weapons. Usually there is, like, it's set in a particular location, like a summer camp or a college or a hospital. And, you know, like I said, they have the final girl, which, to define the final girl, it's basically like a girl that's surviving till the very end. And, you know, like I said, she has to face the killer and defeat them. And usually in the movie, there's some kind of, like, they always have kind of similar names. They'll have, like, the word massacre or blood or bloody in the title, or don't will be in the title, or it'll be the name of a holiday. I think Roger Ebert coined the phrase "dead teenager movies" to describe these, because that's basically what, you know, they're very simple. The plots are not very complicated. They're pretty much popcorn movies for the most part. Now, within the whole killer genre of horror movies, there are other subgenres that I don't think are slashers. There's what they call giallo, which are Italian horror movies that slashers took a lot of inspiration from. Then you got your crime movies that have just like your serial killers. Then you have like the backwoods or redneck type movies, and I kind of lump Texas Chainsaw Massacre into that category, even though I know it is technically a slasher. And then you also have home invasion movies, which a good example of that would be The Strangers. It's one where people are trapped in a house, or when they're in their own house, and these people try to get into their house, and sometimes they're wearing masks, or, you know, usually they're wearing masks or something. And people are trying to get in, and they're having just to keep them out and trying to survive for a certain amount of time or overnight or something like that. But usually, the plots of slasher movies usually follow a set plot. It usually starts out with there's some kind of event in the past. Something happens where there's some kind of trauma that happens to somebody. Either like the members of a community are guilty of a wrongful action, or the killer sees an injury, a fall, or death, or the killer experiences a loss, or the killer actually kills the guilty members of the community in the past. But then usually the movie jumps to the present day, and the killer returns to take revenge on the guilty parties, or it could be just other people that remind them of the guilty people that like affected them in the past. You know, there's different triggers. It could be an event that commemorates the past trauma, or the killer's could be just their destructive impulse could be reactivated for some reason. And there's usually like a somebody that tries to warn like the teenagers that something's going to happen. And especially in the Friday the 13th movies, there's a character by the name of Crazy Ralph.
God damn it, Ralph, get out of here. Go on, get. Leave people alone.
You'll never come back again.
Oh, shut up, Ralph.
It's got a death curse.
I'm a messenger of God. You're doomed if you stay here. This place is cursed. Cursed. You're doomed. You're all doomed.
And, you know, one of my favorite parts of the first two movies is Crazy Ralph, because he is just, pretty over the top, and, you know, it's funny. And usually the teenagers, they don't listen to the warning, you know, they just go on and party or do whatever they're going to do. So, you know, and the killer ends up stalking these teens and killing them one by one. And usually it targets the people that are doing drugs, having sex, smoking, and drinking. These are the prime candidates for being killed in these movies. And usually, you know, it follows the same kind of plot. The final girl usually discovers the murders that are happening, and then she discovers the killer, and there's usually like a chase scene or something, and then they finally kind of do battle, where the final girl usually kills the killer. But sometimes there is no survivor. Sometimes the killer just, you know, is still alive. But sometimes, even if the killer is killed, they usually come back for like a sequel, either one sequel or 10 sequels. There's, traditionally in these movies, there's like 10 sequels, and it seems like they just go on and on. So yeah, I don't know, Dakota, what do you consider to be a slasher movie? What's kind of like a broad definition for you?
I don't know. A real broad definition for me would just be the feeling of being stalked in a movie. I mean, there's really, like I said, I'm not an expert in it, so I really don't know how to define it the best way. The best way I could say it is a killer versus teens. I mean, that's the only way I can really see it.
Yeah.
Something I actually was doing research on. When we talked about doing the Horror 101, you talked about doing the slasher films. Have you ever heard of the Hays Code?
Is that when people are referring to like the pre-code days or something like that? I don't know.
Yeah.
Go ahead and say. I guess I'm not real familiar with it.
Well, when I was doing research, what I found is the Hays Code was actually in response to a silent movie called The Lunatics. It was in 1912 when the movie came out. It was pretty much just a gore fest, an absolute gore fest. And at the time in 1912, you really didn't see a lot of movies like that. They didn't promote sexual promiscuity or anything of the sort. Something that kind of went into a little bit. They didn't allow pointed profanity, so it's either you can't read the lips, they didn't put it in the words, you couldn't hear it. No suggestive nudity or anything like that. No illegal references to drugs, perversion of sex. White slavery, that's a big one for some reason. That's in bold. And then there was another one. It says basically integration of the races, between white and black, which is very big at the time. Obviously, we know leading up to the 1960s, segregation was big, but this was talking about even sex between black and whites, sexual hygiene or venereal diseases. I mean, there's a lot of stuff in this, and it's just because of movies. One movie that came out and it disturbed a lot of people.
Okay, so these are all this code that you're talking about would be things that they would watch for, and if they saw it, they would really heavily censor the movie,
or not allow them to make it, because they would have to do is in Hollywood when the movies would go before the screeners, the ones who had to see it, it went before censors. If censors thought it was too extreme, they would pull it out and not allow people to watch it. There's a lot of movies. I did a little more research. There's a lot of movies sitting in Hollywood in what they call the Hollywood Dungeon that have never seen the light of day.
Whoa, that would be cool to check out.
Yeah, people in Hollywood aren't going to let you know what it really is, but I mean, the Hollywood Dungeon does exist, and I think it'd be interesting to see some of that. But with slasher films, I think the main thing is to define it is the dynamic. To what creates the slasher film is the dynamic between the hero or anti-hero and the slasher.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like the dynamic between you said the dynamic between the hero and villain, is that what you said?
Yeah, or the anti-hero per se,
right.
like another villain that becomes a hero, like in Freddy vs. Jason.
Yeah, I think that's definitely one of the things for myself that defines horror for me. If you have the dynamic where between the protagonist and the antagonist, where the protagonist or hero is if they're not scared of the situation, if they're acting very indestructible, they can just take anyone out, they're not scared, then to me that doesn't really feel like a horror movie. If the hero is more vulnerable and if they're basically if they're the victim, then I feel like that really signifies whether or not the movie's a horror movie or not. And I don't know if that's even related to what you're talking about or not.
Well, no, that's perfectly okay with what I'm trying to get at. But with movies like Nightmare on Elm Street, the second one particularly, you had characters that felt like they were immune to to Freddy's evil. So I mean, even then they played the victim because they were the unknowing victim. So I mean, even like I think that's something that a lot of actors, not actors but directors, capitalize on. They capitalize on this idea of the unknowing victim. I mean, a couple horror movies that came out a couple years ago, some scenes in them were not scripted. Like, have you seen My Bloody Valentine?
Yeah.
Okay, there was a scene in My Bloody Valentine where the slasher or whatever he was, the miner dude, jumped out and scared the shit out of Jensen Ackles, and he had no idea what was going on. So his reaction in that scene was real.
Okay, I got you. Yeah, so it's like, so it's kind of an unscripted scare, and they just want to get their genuine reaction to the scare. Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, see, that's more of a device used by directors. But even, like I said, in Nightmare on Elm Street, the second one, you had characters. I think the second one had the gym teacher and then the bullies, because the bully kept getting whipped, and he was like supposed to be this big, rough, tough guy. He was supposed to be an invincible character, but he was an unknowing victim.
Yeah, it's been a while since I've seen that one. I don't remember a whole lot of it. But yeah, it's not one of my favorite ones of the series. Because it was, I don't know I can't remember now what it was about it, but I just didn't really like that one. Okay, so to kind of go on here, everybody's always debating about what started the slasher movie craze, or what was the first slasher movie that was made. And while there was a lot of movies, from the 20s on up to the 60s and 70s that kind of gave us our common elements to a slasher movie, I don't know, there's always, like in the early 70s, there was a couple of movies that people kind of like look at as the beginning, and those are Black Christmas and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre from 1974. And both of those movies, they really do set up the basic rules for the formula. But then I feel like Halloween in 1978 was like the perfect combination of all the tropes and the conventions of a slasher kind of mixed together. But some of the earlier influences, I thought that was interesting. There was, I didn't realize there was so many older movies that slashers took elements from, but there was like The Bat from 1959 with Vincent Price. There was The Old Dark House from 1932. A lot of these movies introduced the madman on the loose subject or theme. And, you even got like the killer POV shots, the killer point of view shots. There's a movie called The Scarlet Claw from 1944 where it features murders committed with a signature weapon. In the 60s, of course, you had Psycho that people I think really feel like was a precursor to the slasher movie, because you had that movie introduced more violence on the screen. People saw like blood and stabbings and so you had all that going on. Let's see, in Peeping Tom, you had more of the killer point of view type shots. And the movie called Homicidal in 1961 kind of brought the gore factor into it. And in Dementia 13, there was an axe murderer in that one. So some of these were early precursors to what we saw in the late 70s and early 80s. And some of the other subgenres that influenced slashers, you had the splatter movies that featured extreme gore, like Blood Feast in the 60s. There was some German violent crime movies called Creamy. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but they featured mask-wearing killers, and then of course you had the Giallos, which were Italian crime movies, and they usually had unseen killers, and their identity was a mystery until the very end. And then in the 70s, you had these exploitation movies coming out, these B movies, and they brought the teenagers into the stories. They kind of moved away from the adults, and they're moving away from the gothic horror of the 60s and 50s and bringing the stories into the modern day. And so in the early 70s, that's when you get movies like Black Christmas, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and Halloween that feature the terror happening to like college kids or high school kids. And so, in the early to mid 80s, the slasher formula was kind of becoming more consistent. basically with the killer terrorizing teenagers and, in an isolated place, and the final girl, all that stuff started to kind of formalize, and slashers, they all paid attention to this formula, and all the successful ones in the early 80s really stuck to this formula. They did not stray from it much at all. And so the time from like 1978 to 1984 is commonly known as the golden age of the slasher movies. That's when I don't want to say the best slashers were made, but to me, they're the best slashers. I mean, there's been slashers made, since then, but those are the kind of movies that I really like. And in this time, you got some of the more prominent villains, or as Dakota referred to, the anti-heroes. You had Jason Voorhees, you had Freddy Krueger, and you had Michael Myers to some degree, even though, like for me growing up, Michael Myers wasn't as iconic as Jason and Freddy. But then, of course, whenever you have a successful movie, you're always going to have the clones. So in the early 80s, you had a lot of Halloween clones. You had a lot of Friday the 13th clones. And so when Friday the 13th started, that's when the studios really started making these slasher movies, because they were becoming more profitable. And even other countries got in on it. You had a lot of Canadian slashers, like Curtains, Prom Night, and Terror Train. Those are like some prominent slasher movies, but they're actually Canadian. And then you also began to see some made-for-TV slasher movies. And one of the best ones, I think, is called Dark Night of the Scarecrow. And then, you had Nightmare on Elm Street coming out in 1984, which brought in the supernatural element to a slasher movie, where the killer was killing people in their dreams. And many franchises were started in the 80s. You had the Friday the 13th franchise. And when I say franchise, I mean like a movie that has more than 2 sequels, or that has several sequels. So you had the Friday the 13th franchise, you had the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise. You had Psycho, even had a few sequels. Like I said, with these sequels, the villain keeps coming back. They're basically the only connecting point to most of these movies is the villain. There's not a whole lot of heroes or final girls that come back for each movie. You do see it somewhat, like in Halloween. Jamie Lee Curtis is there for a few of the movies, and I think in Nightmare on Elm Street, I think her name's Nancy. She comes back for one of the later movies. So then, of course, in the 80s, they have these movies called SOV, or shot on video films, which are basically made with like camcorders, or like the handheld video recorders. They were very low budget, but because of the slasher craze, many people were able to make these low budget slashers and get them distributed, because everybody was just looking for slashers. And many of these, they weren't really theatrical movies. They were released directly to VHS. And these are the movies that are more obscure and harder to find today, and they're ones that are really valuable to collectors. Even though they're really bad movies, most of them are not good quality at all. But then as the 80s went on, there was kind of a decline in the slashers. Most of them were direct to video at this point. Or pretty much the only thing being made at this point was like sequels to existing franchises. So you had some kind of oddball slashers too. You had this trend of like these Santa Claus slasher movies, which I thought was really interesting. And, there was a lot of protesting that happened. I think the main one is called Silent Night, Deadly Night. And it has a Santa Claus guy, a guy that dresses up like Santa Claus, and is killing killing people. And so there was a big outcry, a big outrage over that. But you had like several Santa Claus slasher movies, and you had some other weird ones where the killer just dressed up like in weird outfits. Like there's one called Girls Night Out, where the killer wore this big like bear mascot suit. It was just really kind of ridiculous. But then you have one slasher movies that have just ridiculous weapons too. There's one called Nail Gun Massacre and Wood Chipper Massacre, which were just really bad movies. I actually sat through them and watched them. There was even a Bigfoot slasher called Night of the Demon. There's an alien slasher called Without Warning. And even some of the action stars in the 80s got into the slasher craze. You had Chuck Norris with Silent Rage in 1982, and you had Charles Bronson with a movie called 10 to Midnight in 1983. So then moving into the 90s, you had, it was really kind of dead at that point at the beginning of the 90s. And I feel like Wes Craven's New Nightmare in 1994 really kind of helped I don't know, it was kind of a resurgence, but the resurgence of the slasher movie didn't really happen until 1996 when a movie called Scream came out.
When Scream came out in 1996, that led to an enormous resurgence in the slasher film. And it was a very interesting resurgence because it took two different tracks. On one hand, you had films like Scream and its ilk, which were self-reflexive, self-conscious films that really deconstructed the slasher formula and pointed to the audience and said, we know you know what the game is, but you're going to enjoy it nonetheless. Then you had films at the same time which took a straightforward approach. I Know What You Did Last Summer, Urban Legend, Valentine. These films, while respectful of the original slasher films from the early 80s, used the same formula to draw on the same fears and appeal to the same type of audience who enjoyed these films in the early 80s.
And it was really I think the thing that made it different and made it fresh was because it was very self-aware of the slasher genre, and it kind of it poked fun at the slasher genre, and it spelled it out for you, okay, this is what's going to happen. And then, of course, like I said, when you have a successful movie, you're going to have all the clones coming out. You had, you had H2O, which was a Halloween sequel, but it was kind of trying to ride the tailcoats of Scream, but it was paying an homage to the previous movies in the 80s. And then you also had I Know What You Did Last Summer, Urban Legend, and Valentine, which were some Scream clones in the late 90s. And then in the 2000s, you had a bunch of reboots that happened. You had the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Black Christmas, When a Stranger Calls, Rob Zombie's Halloween, Prom Night, My Bloody Valentine, which is something that Dakota was talking about earlier with, did you say the star was Jensen Ackles from Supernatural?
Yeah, it's Jensen Ackles from Supernatural. It had a lot of other stars in it too, but he's the only one I really recognize.
Yeah, and I really liked that remake. I thought it was good. You had Friday the 13th reboot. So you had a lot of reboots at the start of the in the 2000s. You had a lot of reboots because people were kind of going back to the 80s and wanting to make serious slashers, but kind of pay tribute to the 80s. But then you also had some all original slashers. You had some notable ones were Behind the Mask, The Rise of Leslie Vernon, which was a great original slasher. You have the Hatchet series. Let's see, Wes Craven did My Soul to Take in 2010, and All the Boys Love Mandy Lane. That was another all original slasher. But in these movies, they kind of got away from the final girl. You didn't really have the final girl character anymore. The killings were more random, like the whole drug sex thing. The killer didn't really target people that were doing these things. They targeted anyone and everyone. Even the killers are more justified, in some cases with some of the plots. There's some notable directors that have made some really good slashers that you should look at first to dive into this. You've got Wes Craven, which, he really made a lot of good slasher movies. He made the Nightmare on Elm Street movies. He made Scream. And then you also had Tobe Hooper, and he did the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. You have John Carpenter, which he did the Halloween movie, the first one. You have Sean S. Cunningham. He did the Friday the 13th movie. And you have Bob Clark, which he's kind of done different movies, but the reason why he's on this list is because he did Black Christmas. And that is a really good slasher movie. Or some notable final girls are Jamie Lee Curtis from the Halloween series, Neve Campbell from the Scream series, Heather Langenkamp from Nightmare on Elm Street, Danielle Harris from the Halloween series as well, and Amy Still from the Friday the 13th series. She was only in part 2, but Amy Still was also in the other slasher that she was in was April Fool's Day, which is another good 80s slasher. And so, thinking about why I love slashers so much, they usually build up a good mystery for the most part, because the identity of the killer is usually unknown, unless it's, sometimes it's not always that way, but that's kind of what drew me into like Scream, was like the mystery of the killer. And I love like the different masks that they feature, like the killer, the disguises the killers wear. I love that, seeing the different masks. And then I also like the kills. I like to see just the different ways that they find to kill people, the inventive ways they find. And I think like the reason why like slashers keep getting made, people may be wondering, it's like the same thing over and over again. Why do people keep making these movies? And it's, you have a real big cult fan base to these movies. And so, and it seems like the movies that do stick to that common formula are the ones that do well. The ones that kind of try to evolve, I guess, or try to add to it, are the ones that people don't really like. The fans, they don't really latch on to them as much. They just want to see like a killer in a mask killing teenagers. That's basically what slasher fans want. And so as long as new ones are being made, this cult fan base is going to keep shelling out the money to watch them. Because I think people, like for myself, I'm always on the search for new slasher movies. And, and I have to look at some of the lower budget ones because I run out of other ones to watch. But some of those lower budget ones are not bad, because with a slasher movie, you don't have to spend a lot of money to do that. Some of the gore, you want to have some good special effects for some of the kills. But anyway, so that's kind of like why I like them and why I feel like they're going to keep making slashers. And I wanted to give you guys some good resources to check out. Like if you are wanting to do some more like exploring on your own of the slasher genre, there are some really good documentaries that you should check out. There's one called Going to Pieces, and it's Going to Pieces, The Rise and Fall of the Slasher Film. It was made in 2006. You can find it on DVD, and you might be able to find it online in some places. Then there's a good documentary for Halloween. It's called Halloween 25 Years of Terror. There's a couple of good Friday the 13th documentaries. There's one called His Name is Jason, 30 Years of Friday the 13th. That was made in 2009. And there's another one called Crystal Lake Memories, The Complete History of Friday the 13th, made in 2013. There was a really good Nightmare on Elm Street documentary called Never Sleep Again, The Elm Street Legacy. And as far as I know, it was on Netflix, but it may be gone by now. There's a couple of good books that you should check out too. There's one called The Slasher Movie Book by J.A. Kurzweil. And that one is more of like a coffee table. That's what I call a coffee table book, because it's kind of like a larger hardback book, but it's got some really great artwork from like the 80s slashers and some really cool. It's got like the movie posters in it, and it's got like some screenshots from some of the movies, and it's got a lot of cool artwork. I'm going to pick that up eventually. And there's another one I found called Slash Dreams: The Ultimate Guide to Slasher Movies, by Ronnie Angel, and that one seems like a good guide to, just a good general guide to slasher films. And I wanted to name off my top 10 slashers. Before I do that, I just want to, I know I've been kind of going on here for a while here, Dakota, but are there any slashers that stand out to you as being really good, or some of the ones that you like a lot?
One that's really stand out for me was The Hills Have Eyes.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
People I know like somebody like you, somebody who's like into the slasher movies, probably wouldn't consider it a full slasher movie, but in a way it is, because these inbred, whatever they are, they have the tendency to be more of a slasher than they are what they are. You know what I mean?
Sure.
So they kind of throw off those mixed vibes. Nightmare on Elm Street, that series really stuck out for me just because after I watched it, I couldn't sleep for a week, but it's just because that element of horror in these type of movies, like specifically like monster movies and that, in that aspect. Like Freddy Krueger would have been a monster inside your head. That's the kind of slasher movie I like. I'm not, like I said, I'm not really into Scream just because it's too modern for my taste. Anything that really just sticks out, like mentally, is what really gets me for slasher films. And there's not many out there like that.
Right? Yeah, they're very much. They're pretty. A lot of slashers are pretty much popcorn movies. You know, they're stuff you just kind of turn your brain off and just, you're just along for the ride. But so I'm going to give you guys a quick rundown of my top 10 slashers. And these are ones that I go back to time and time again. These are ones that I own in my personal collection. And so for me, these are some of my favorites. If you check them out, you may not like them. Because I like B movies. So some of these are probably not the best movies, but anyway, this is just my personal top 10 slasher list. So starting off with number 10 is Black Christmas from 1974. It's just a great Christmas themed slasher. It's a really creepy setting. Number 9 is a movie called Pieces. It was done in the 80s. I can't remember offhand when, but that one is definitely a B movie. It's nothing to really take seriously. There's a lot of laugh out loud moments in that movie actually. And I don't know if it was done intentionally or not. It may have been. But let's see here. My number 8 is Prom Night from the 80s, not the new remake. I didn't really like the remake at all. So, I definitely like Prom Night from the early 80s, I think. And I know it's kind of a slower slasher. You have to wait a while to get the kills, but I think it has a good sense of atmosphere in that movie. I feel like there's some good atmosphere because of the killer stalking people and calling people and just using the creepy voice to kind of scare people. And so that's my number 8. Number 7 is Wrong Turn from, I don't remember. Sorry, I don't have the dates, but basically the first Wrong Turn movie. I do like, Dakota. I love the backwoods, redneck inbred, slasher movie type movies. I love those. So I think that, Wrong Turn is definitely one of my favorites. That's number 7. Number 6 is The Fun House from the 80s. Number 5 is The Burning, which we talked about a couple episodes back. Number 4 is My Bloody Valentine, and that's the one from the 80s. Which I also did really like the remake though too. My number 3 is Scream. Scream is probably the movie that made me the slasher fanatic I am today. So that's number 3. Number 2. So people are probably going to think this is a little controversial, but my favorite Friday the 13th movie is Part 3. I just love that one. It's the first one I saw. It's the one I could watch over and over again. So that's my number 2. And of course, my number 1 is John Carpenter's Halloween. I love John Carpenter, even though this is really the only slasher movie he's made. But Halloween is the best in my book. And then as far as some other things that I like I said, I like to see the different masks that killers wear in these movies. So I kind of made a little list of my top 10 masks in slasher movies as well. So I'm going to start off with number 10, my top 10 masks in slasher movies. Number 10 is from a movie called Satan's Little Helper, and I think this one does not get talked about nearly enough, but it's definitely a low budget movie. If you can find it on DVD, I would say pick it up. It's an entertaining slasher movie, but the killer, he wears this it's like a demon mask or like a devil mask, and it's just kind of creepy. Let's see, number 9 is Terror Train, and in that one the killer kind of switches masks. He switches to different masks throughout the movie, and some of them are really effective. My number 8 is Tourist Trap. That was a really freaky mannequin slasher movie. I would seek that one out if you haven't seen it. It's really kind of a weird slasher movie. And let's see, the next one, number 7 is Curtains. That mask is it's like this old lady mask. It's really creepy. Let's see. Number 6 is The Strangers. I like those masks a lot. I think that kind of harken back a lot to the 80s. Number 5 is the Cupid mask from Valentine. I really liked Valentine a lot. I thought that was a great slasher from the 2000s. Number 4 is Michael Myers' mask from Halloween. Number 3 is actually from Laid to Rest, Chrome Skull. I just really like his look in that movie. Number 2 is Leatherface. I just thought that was really creepy looking. And my number 1 slasher mask was Jason from Part 2 was wearing the sack kit. I thought that was just a really cool kind of backwoods kind of creepy mask. So that kind of gives you like a primer for slasher movies, what they are, where they came from, some ones to look up. See, Dakota, is there anything else you want to add on the slasher genre before we wrap it up?
Yeah, with the slasher genre, you're really going in for more of the jump scares. We talked about this before with the different types of horror. You're going in for a different thing every time. Going in to see a movie like Halloween, you're not going to come out feeling the same way that you'd go out feeling from a movie like Session 9 or Silent House. You're going to feel scared, obviously, but it's a different type of fear. You're going into a slasher movie, getting the jump scares, getting that gross out gore effect, while you're leaving a movie like Session 9, like your mind's twisted, and you're thrown for a loop. So with that, I just want to say again, we keep beating. I know it sounds like we're beating a dead fish here, but horror is what you make it. I mean, you're gonna be scared if you're not. Slasher films, like I said, I don't have much experience with them, so I can't really speak openly about them. I can just say what I know and what I've experienced in the past.
Yeah, and this is totally subjective. That all these and maybe these subgenres that we're talking about, maybe you think that they, some other movies fit in with this subgenres. This is totally just my opinion. Maybe you think like a movie like The Strangers is a slasher movie, and that's cool. I think for me, why I don't consider The Strangers a slasher movie is because there's a very low body count. There's not a lot of slashing going on. There's a lot of lurking and stalking going on, which I like. But and the killers wore masks. So yeah, definitely it could be argued that that's a slasher movie. But yeah, this is just kind of our opinions about what it is. So as we wrap up this episode, I just want to remind you guys that we're out there on social media. We do have a Facebook fan page. You can go and like it, and I try to post articles on there. And I'm on Twitter too, at Black Cat Podcast. Yeah, it's at Black Cat Podcast. You can follow me on there. I usually try to tweet out some stuff about horror, like some horror headline type stuff. And we're on Horror Amino. And if you guys have any ideas of episode ideas or things like that, you can, or just want to ask a question or say hi, definitely you can feel welcome to email us. Our email is blackcatpodcast@gmail.com. You can download the episodes from iTunes or Stitcher, or probably a lot of other podcast apps out there that have our podcast on it, or you can just go to our website at www.blackcatsshadow.com, and it has we've posted all of our episodes on there as well. And on the website it has links to our iTunes and Stitcher and things like that. So definitely go on there, check that out. The music on this episode is done by my band Me and My Shadow. You can check that out at meandmyshadow.rocks is our website. And we're also on Facebook and Twitter. Our Twitter handle is at Omega Hi-Fi. It's kind of like, if you can kind of tell from the music on the our theme song and stuff. It's more of it's rock, but it's a lot of synthesizer type stuff mixed in with it. Yeah, so Dakota, you got anything you want to plug before we wrap it up?
Yeah. If you guys have noticed, I haven't been really active on Horror Amino here lately. A lot of it has to do with my writing right now. I'm in the zone right now with my novel. I've been trying to get the second part of Jesse's Dreams out. I've just been so ground in with this novel. Eventually, I'm going to actually probably put it out there on Horror Amino so you can see a little bit of what I'm writing. And then, if you're okay with it, Andy, I've actually wanted to probably read a little excerpt from it later on in the future.
Yeah.
It is still kind of rough. I haven't really edited it or anything. If you guys want to look for me on Horror Amino, see some of the stuff I put on there so far, it's just Rainstorm01. The Rain is spelled Rain. It's all one word. Another thing, for anybody who's listening in the areas like North Carolina, Virginia, the places that you've been seeing these clowns, this is a craze that's been going on for years. I don't know if you knew anything about this, but the Clowns, the movie Clown that's supposed to be coming out here soon.
Yeah.
There was a publicity stunt a while back when they were the ones who actually wrote this movie. They did this exact same thing too. So I'm thinking this is something leading up to it. I don't think this is real a creepy clown scenario. I think there's just a bunch of copycats that have taken it up and started doing it themselves.
Yeah, it's weird. Like, some people are thinking, well, maybe it's a promotion for the movie It that they're working on or something like that, but nobody's really, like, claimed responsibility for these these creepy clowns, so I guess it's just people that are just walking around in clown outfits and trying to scare people, but, yeah, it's really weird, and I think the police are even, like, warning people not to dress up as clowns for Halloween because people are just really like paranoid about that right now, and they may somebody may get shot. If you're dressed up like a clown, people may go on the offensive, and try to I don't know.
Yeah, for those in the Kansas area, Topeka and Parsons, there have been 3 clown sightings so far. The one in Parsons, Kansas, was actually standing in the middle of the highway at 2:00 in the morning.
Oh, that's creepy. Yeah.
So there's been a lot of copycats, but it's not a pandemic or anything. It's just I think it's a lot of people just trying to be funny. Since we are in the month of fright and fear, there's got to be something to it. I don't really want to go too far into that because I am doing a little bit more research on this phenomenon, as some people are calling it. Just be looking out. Stay safe. Don't dress as clowns. Don't run at cops or anything, because that's what happened. I don't know if you saw this or not, but a clown guy ran at a cop with a machete and got capped. I mean, it's pretty.
Oh wow.
That's pretty good reason not to run at a cop with a machete.
Yeah, that's pretty much common sense there. Yeah, but I'll be interested to see what you find out, because that is an interesting thing. Like, what's going on? Is it just people goofing around, or is there like a clown club somewhere that sprung up online that we don't know about? Yeah, who knows?
Yeah, if anybody does know, let us know, please, because there's people out here that are terrified of clowns, like myself. Just for you people who heard that. Don't do it. Don't do it.
Yeah. So, all right, guys. Well, that's going to wrap it up for me and Dakota. So, yeah, this has been our slasher episode. So, remember, guys, to take a closer look at the world around you, and you might just find it a stranger and more mysterious than you thought, especially in the Black Cat Shadow.